The family meeting that should have secured my future instead became my execution. Mother sat at the head of our mahogany dining table, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the surface as she delivered her verdict. Elena, we've made our decision. Your brother's medical school tuition takes priority. We can no longer afford to support your hobby degree. Father avoided my eyes, fidgeting with his wedding ring. Behind them, my brother Jake smirked from the doorway, already counting the money that would flow his way. The fake medical bills he'd been submitting, the forged acceptance letter to an expensive private program. I knew it was all lies, but in my first life I'd been too naive to see through their elaborate deception. But I'm only one semester away from graduating, I had pleaded, my voice breaking. I've maintained a 4.0 GPA. I have job offers waiting. Job offers in marketing? Mother's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Please, Elena. Jake is going to be a doctor. A doctor. Do you understand what that means for our family's reputation? For our future? The words that followed were the same ones that had destroyed me before. How I was selfish. How I was wasting their money on a useless business degree. How I should be grateful they'd supported me as long as they had. As I'd stumbled away from that table, devastated and abandoned, I'd made the desperate decisions that led to my ruin. But now, I was staring at Mother across that same dining table, that same calculated coldness in her eyes masquerading as maternal concern. Elena, sweetheart, you understand why we have to make these difficult choices, don't you? This time, I knew exactly what they were planning. I set down my teacup with deliberate calm, watching as the sound echoed in the silence. Of course, Mother, family comes first. My voice was steady, betraying none of the rage that burned beneath the surface. When do you need me to withdraw from university? The surprise that flickered across her face was quickly masked. She'd expected tears, pleading, the same broken-hearted daughter who'd begged them to reconsider. Instead, she was faced with someone who seemed almost relieved. Well, she cleared her throat, by the end of the week would be ideal. That way, we can redirect your tuition payments immediately. Of course, I smiled, the expression feeling foreign after so much pain. I'll handle all the paperwork tomorrow. Father shifted uncomfortably. Elena, we know this is difficult, but... It's fine, Father. I reached across the table and patted his hand, noting how he flinched at my touch. Actually, I am grateful you're finally being honest about your priorities. The barb landed exactly where I'd intended. Mother's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all. I stood, smoothing down my skirt. I assume you'll want me out of the house as well, since I'll no longer be contributing to the family's prestigious image? The question hung in the air like a challenge. In my previous life, they'd waited 3 months before delivering that particular blow, timing it perfectly to coincide with my complete financial dependence on them. This time, I was forcing their hand early. We hadn't discussed, Father began, but Mother cut him off. Actually, Elena, since you bring it up, yes, we think it would be best if you found your own arrangements. Jake needs the space to study, and frankly, we need to focus our resources on his success. There it was, the complete abandonment delivered with surgical precision. I understand completely. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mother, that medical program Jake showed you, the tuition costs? Her spine stiffened. What about them? You might want to verify they're legitimate. Just a suggestion from your foolish daughter who wasted her time studying business and finance. I left them sitting in stunned silence and climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom. 3 hours until my meeting with Alexander Kim. 3 hours to set the foundation for everything that would come next. My laptop hummed to life, displaying the portfolio I'd spent 3 years building in secret. Stock investments, cryptocurrency trades, a small but profitable online consulting business, all hidden from my family behind a web of shell companies and trust accounts. The account balance that stared back at me was enough to make my parents weep. $847,000 and growing. While they'd been planning to abandon me, I'd been quietly building an empire. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner, James Liu. The Kim Industries meeting is confirmed for 7 p.m. Are you sure you want to do this? It's a huge leap. I typed back quickly, more sure than I've ever been about anything. See you there. In my previous life, I'd missed this meeting. Devastated by my family's betrayal, drowning in depression, I'd never had the courage to pursue the partnership that would have changed everything. This time would be different. I pulled out the designer clothes I'd secretly purchased, not the second-hand bargains my parents assumed I was limited to, but real Chanel, real Hermes, investments in the image I needed to project. As I changed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Gone was the defeated girl who'd begged for scraps of affection. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, infinitely more dangerous. My phone rang. Mother's contact photo filled the screen. A family portrait where she'd positioned herself prominently in the centre while I'd been relegated to the edge. I let it go to voicemail, then listened with growing satisfaction to her increasingly frantic message. Elena, we need to talk. Your father is concerned we were too hasty. Perhaps we can work something out, a partial scholarship, maybe living at home while you finish school. Call me back immediately. They'd already discovered Jake's lies. The fake medical program, the forged documents. It had all unravelled within hours of my subtle suggestion. Now, they were realising they'd thrown away their actually successful child for a son who'd never amounted to anything more than an expensive disappointment. But it was too late for regret. I deleted the voicemail without responding and finished getting dressed. The woman who looked back at me from the full-length mirror was someone my parents had never bothered to see. Confident, successful, completely self-sufficient. At 6:30 p.m, I drove through the city in the BMW I purchased 6 months ago, another secret they'd never discovered. The meeting location was the penthouse restaurant atop the Kim Industries building, 30 floors above the glittering cityscape. As I rode the elevator up, I reflected on the beautiful irony of it all. In 3 hours, I'd gone from discarded daughter to independent businesswoman. By tomorrow, I'd be the equal partner of one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs, and my parents would still be trying to figure out where they'd gone wrong. The elevator doors opened to reveal Alexander Kim waiting in the restaurant's foyer. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from genuine achievement rather than inherited privilege. In my first life, I'd only known him by reputation. The brilliant CEO who'd built his family's small tech company into a multinational empire before his 30th birthday. Miss Swang, he extended his hand, James has told me incredible things about your work. I have to admit, I'm intrigued by someone who can generate the kind of returns you've been showing while supposedly being a broke college student. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the direct eye contact. Mr. Kim, I believe in letting results speak louder than circumstances. Shall we discuss the future? As we were seated at a private table overlooking the city, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jake, probably calling to rage about his lies being exposed. I silenced the phone and turned my full attention to the man across from me. I have to ask, Alexander said as we perused the wine list. What changed? James mentioned you've been hesitant about major partnerships until now. I smiled, thinking of my parents frantically calling my silenced phone, of Jake's crumbling house of cards, of the freedom that came with finally accepting who they really were. Let's just say I recently gained some clarity about what I truly value, I said, and, more importantly, what I don't. The waiter approached to take our order, and as Alexander began discussing his vision for our potential partnership, I felt the last chains of my old life falling away. My parents had wanted to discard me like trash, believing I had nothing to offer and nowhere to turn. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. But first, I had an empire to build. 2 hours later, Alexander raised his wine glass in a toast. "To Wang Kim Enterprises," he said, his eyes reflecting the city light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Equal partners in what I predict will be a very profitable venture." I clinked my glass against his, savouring both the vintage wine and the moment. To proving that merit matters more than family connections. The contracts were signed, the terms negotiated with a precision that had clearly impressed him. 60-40 split on all profits, with me taking the larger share due to the proprietary algorithms I developed for market analysis. It was more than fair. It was revolutionary. "I have to admit," Alexander said, leaning back in his chair, "when James first showed me your projection models, I thought they were too good to be true. A 22-year-old college student outperforming seasoned Wall Street analysts? But your track record speaks for itself. Age is just a number when you have the right data and the discipline to act on it." I pulled up my tablet, showing him the real-time dashboard I'd created. "These algorithms don't care about my parents' opinions or my brother's medical school dreams. They only care about results." His phone buzzed with a message, and he glanced at it with a frown. "Excuse me for a moment. My assistant is handling some media inquiries about the partnership announcement. Apparently, word travels fast in this industry." While he stepped away to take the call, my own phone lit up like a Christmas tree. 17 missed calls from home, 12 text messages, and 3 voicemails. I scrolled through the messages with detached amusement. "Father, Elena, please call. We need to discuss this rationally." Mother, "Stop being childish. Come home immediately." Jake, "You ruined everything. How could you sabotage me like this?" The voicemails were even more entertaining. Mother's voice grew increasingly shrill with each message, transitioning from condescending patience to barely controlled panic. The final one, left just 20 minutes ago, was pure desperation. "Elena, I don't know what game you're playing, but this has gone far enough. Your father had a heart palpitation when the medical school called, asking about Jake's fabricated transcripts. Do you want to kill your own father? Come home this instant and fix this mess you've created." I deleted all the messages without responding. Alexander returned, sliding his phone into his jacket pocket. "Everything all right? You look like you've received some interesting news?" "Just my family, realizing they may have made a tactical error," I said. "Nothing that concerns our business." "Good, because I have a proposition that might interest you." He signaled the waiter for another bottle of wine. "I'm hosting a private investor gathering this weekend. Some of the city's most influential venture capitalists, a few tech executives, old family friends. I'd like you to present your market analysis system to them." My pulse quickened. In my previous life, I'd only dreamed of such opportunities. "That's quite an honour. What's the expected ROI for your guests?" "That depends entirely on how much they're willing to invest in the future." His smile was sharp, predatory. "But I suspect a young woman who can build a near $1 million portfolio while her family thinks she's penniless might have some interesting insights to share." The waiter poured fresh wine, and Alexander raised his glass again. "To the weekend that changes everything." We spent another hour discussing logistics, target markets, and expansion strategies. By the time we shook hands in the restaurant's foyer, I had a clear vision of the empire we were about to build. More importantly, I had a partner who valued competence over connections, results over relationships. The drive home through the city's neon-lit streets felt like a victory lap. My phone remained mercifully silent. Perhaps my family had finally gotten the message that their opinions no longer mattered to me. Or perhaps they were too busy dealing with the consequences of Jake's exposed lies to continue their harassment campaign. I parked in the driveway of our suburban home, noting that every light in the house was blazing. Through the living room window, I could see figures moving frantically, pacing, gesticulating, clearly in the midst of a crisis. Part of me was tempted to walk through the front door and watch them scramble to explain themselves, to see the shock on their faces when they realised their discarded daughter had spent the evening signing multi-million-dollar business deals. Instead, I sat in my car and made a single phone call. Premium Properties, Rebecca speaking. Rebecca, this is Elena Wang. I'd like to schedule a viewing for tomorrow morning. The penthouse apartment we discussed last month. Is it still available? Of course, Miss Wang. I have to say, I'm surprised. Last time we spoke, you seemed to think the price was beyond your budget. My circumstances have recently changed. Shall we say 10 a.m? Perfect. I'll have all the paperwork ready. I hung up and finally walked toward the house. The front door burst open before I could reach for my keys, and Mother practically fell onto the porch in her haste to confront me. There you are. Her hair was dishevelled, her makeup smeared. Do you have any idea what you've done? The medical school contacted us. They want to press charges against Jake for fraud. Fraud, Elena. Your brother could go to prison because of your little tantrum. I stepped around her and into the house, where Father sat slumped in his recliner, looking every one of his 58 years. Jake was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in his room like the coward he'd always been. Where have you been? Mother demanded, following me into the living room. We've been calling for hours. Business dinner, I said simply, setting my purse on the coffee table. Business dinner? What business? You're a college student. Or were, until you decided to throw your education away out of spite. I turned to face her, noting how small she suddenly seemed. In my memories, Mother had been this towering figure of authority, someone whose approval I desperately craved. Now she looked like what she'd always been, a middle-aged woman with delusions of grandeur and a son who'd inherited her talent for deception. Mother, I need you to listen very carefully, I said, my voice calm and measured. I am no longer your responsibility, your dependent, or your problem to solve. As of today, I am a fully independent adult who will be moving out of this house and ending all financial ties to this family. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. You can't survive on your own. You have no money, no job, no... I have a business partnership worth several $1 million in projected revenue. I interrupted. I have assets you know nothing about, connections you can't imagine, and opportunities you never bothered to help me pursue. What I don't have is any further need for your approval or support. The silence that followed was deafening. Father looked up from his chair with confused, watery eyes. Elena, sweetie, what are you talking about? What business partnership? The one I signed tonight while you were dealing with the consequences of Jake's lies. I pulled the signed contracts from my purse and set them on the coffee table. Wang Kim Enterprises, 50-50 partnership with Alexander Kim. Perhaps you've heard of him? Kim Industries? The tech company that just went public for $2 billion. Mother's face went white. She snatched the contracts from the table, scanning them with growing horror. This can't be real. You're 22 years old. You're a college student. How could you possibly? Because, unlike Jake, I actually possess the skills and intelligence you always claimed to value. I retrieved the contracts from her trembling hands. And, unlike you, Alexander Kim recognizes talent when he sees it. Father struggled to his feet, reaching toward me with shaking hands. Elena, please. We made mistakes. We can fix this. We can... You made choices, I corrected, and now you get to live with the consequences. Jake's voice came from the top of the stairs, cracked and desperate. Elena, please. They're going to arrest me. The medical school. They're saying I owe them $60,000 for the fake enrollment. Help me! I looked up at my brother, overweight, sweating, 24 years old, and still dependent on our parents for everything from rent money to grocery bills. In my previous life, his pleading might have moved me. Now it just seemed pathetic. You should have thought about that before you forged transcripts and fabricated acceptance letters, I called back. Actions have consequences, Jake. Time, you learned that. Mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Elena, you cannot abandon this family. We raised you, sacrificed for you. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. You raised me to be useful to Jake's ambitions. You sacrificed my happiness for his convenience. And now, you're reaping exactly what you sowed. I walked toward the stairs, then paused. Oh, and Mother, you might want to start looking for jobs. Both of you. I suspect Jake's legal troubles are going to be expensive, and you'll no longer have my college fund to raid. As I climbed the stairs to pack my belongings, Mother's voice followed me. You can't do this to us. We're your family. But her words held no power over me anymore. Tomorrow I would move into a penthouse apartment. This weekend I would present to some of the city's most powerful investors, and my family would begin to understand the true cost of their betrayal. The sound of Mother's sobbing echoed through the house as I closed my bedroom door and began to pack. It was, I thought, the sweetest sound I'd heard all day. Saturday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, both in the weather and in my purpose. I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse apartment, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up 30 floors below. The moving trucks had finished yesterday evening, and my old bedroom now existed only as a memory. Freedom tasted like French roast and possibility. My phone showed 43 missed calls from home since Thursday night, but I'd blocked their numbers after the first dozen. Let them scream into the void. Today was about the future, not the past. Alexander had arranged for a car to collect me at 2 p.m. The investor gathering was being held at his family estate in the hills overlooking the city, a venue that spoke of old money and serious business. I'd spent the morning fine-tuning my presentation, triple-checking every algorithm, every projection, every slide that would either launch my career into the stratosphere or humble me publicly before the most powerful financial minds in the region. The presentation itself was flawless. I'd rehearsed it until every gesture felt natural, every transition seamless. But as I reviewed my notes one final time, my building's concierge called. Miss Wang, I apologise for disturbing you, but there are some people in the lobby claiming to be your family. They're quite insistent about seeing you. Through my floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see 3 figures standing on the sidewalk below, gesticulating wildly at the building's entrance. Even from this height, Mother's animated hand movements were unmistakable. Please inform them that I'm not available and ask them to leave the premises, I said. If they refuse, call security. Understood, Miss Wang. I watched from my vantage point as the concierge delivered the message. Mother's reaction was immediate and explosive. Even without sound, her rage was visible from 30 floors up. Father appeared to be trying to calm her, while Jake kicked at a nearby trash can like the overgrown child he'd always been. They'd been camping outside my building since yesterday afternoon, according to Rebecca from Premium Properties, who'd called to warn me. Apparently, they'd somehow discovered my new address and were making quite the scene. The building security had already escorted them away twice, but they kept returning like persistent, stray dogs. The driver Alexander had sent arrived precisely at 2 p.m, and I made my way to the lobby. Through the glass doors, I could see my family huddled near the fountain across the street, watching the building's entrance with the intensity of surveillance operatives. Mother spotted me immediately and began running toward the car, waving her arms and shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass. I slipped into the back seat as she reached the sidewalk, her face pressed against the window, mouth moving frantically. For a moment, our eyes met through the tinted glass. The desperation there was almost pitiful. Almost. "Family emergency?" the driver asked diplomatically as we pulled away. "Former family," I corrected, not looking back. The drive to Alexander's estate took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads lined with ancient oaks. The house itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture nestled into the hillside, all clean lines and soaring glass that captured and reflected the afternoon light. Cars filled the circular driveway, Maseratis, Bentleys, a Tesla Roadster that probably cost more than most people's houses. Alexander met me at the entrance, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my parents' mortgage payment. Ready to make history? Born ready. The gathering was intimate by design. 12 carefully selected investors, each representing different sectors of the financial world. I recognized several faces from business magazines. Victoria Chen from Phoenix Ventures, whose hostile takeovers had made headlines for years. Robert Martinez, whose hedge fund had outperformed the market for 8 consecutive years. Sarah Kim, Alexander's older sister and the CEO of their family's investment arm. They were seated in Alexander's study, a room lined with first edition books and dominated by a massive stone fireplace. The afternoon light streaming through tall windows created an atmosphere of quiet power, old money comfortable with its own authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, "I'd like you to meet my new business partner, Elena Wang. Over the past 18 months, she's generated returns that have consistently outperformed every major index using predictive algorithms she developed independently. Elena, the floor is yours." I activated the large screen mounted above the fireplace and began. The first slide showed my actual trading history, not projections or theoretical models, but real money, real gains, real success. The room fell silent as they absorbed the numbers. "Traditional market analysis relies on historical data and human intuition," I began, my voice steady and clear. "My approach combines machine learning with behavioral psychology to predict market movements before they happen, not to react to them. Predict them." The next 20 minutes were the most exhilarating of my professional life. I walked them through the algorithms, demonstrated the prediction accuracy, showed them exactly how I turned initial investments of $5,000 into the portfolio that now approached $1 million. No slides were wasted on theory or academic credentials. Every graph, every chart, every projection was backed by verifiable results. Victoria Chen interrupted halfway through. "Miss Wang, these returns seem almost too good to be true. What's your edge? What are you seeing that the rest of the market is missing?" "I'm seeing what happens when you remove emotional decision-making from the equation," I replied. "Human traders make predictable mistakes. They panic, they get greedy, they follow crowds. My algorithms don't have egos or families to impress. They just follow the data." Robert Martinez leaned forward. "And you developed this system entirely independently? No institutional backing, no academic research team?" "That's correct. I built it in my spare time while supposedly studying for a business degree my parents considered worthless." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Sarah Kim smiled. "Family support can be overrated." I clicked to the final slide, projected returns for the next 5 years based on scaling the operation. The numbers were aggressive but achievable, backed by conservative estimates and multiple scenario analyses. With proper capitalization, this system could manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions within 3 years. The questions that followed were sharp, probing, designed to expose any weakness in my methodology. I answered each one with precision, backing every claim with data, every projection with historical precedent. These weren't polite inquiries. They were stress tests, and I passed every one. When the formal presentation ended, the room erupted into quiet but intense conversations. Business cards were exchanged, phone numbers shared, investment amounts discussed in hushed tones. By the time cocktails were served on the terrace, I had preliminary commitments for over $50 million in managed funds. Alexander found me by the stone balustrade, looking out over the valley where the city sparkled in the distance. "That was remarkable," he said. "Victoria wants to discuss a potential merger with Phoenix Ventures. Robert is interested in licensing your algorithms for his hedge fund, and my sister wants to offer you a position as head of quantitative trading." "All flattering," I replied, "but I prefer building my own empire to joining someone else's." I thought you might say that." He handed me a glass of champagne. "Which is why I've already had my lawyers draft the incorporation papers for Wang Kim Capital Management. Equal partners, unlimited growth potential, and complete control over our own destiny." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Elena, this is your cousin Amy. Your parents asked me to contact you. Your father is in the hospital. Heart attack. They need you to come home." I showed Alexander the message. He read it with a frown. "Family emergency?" "Family manipulation," I corrected. "My father has anxiety attacks, not heart problems. This is their latest attempt to guilt me into rescuing them from the consequences of their choices." "Are you sure? Heart attacks can be serious." I was sure, because I'd seen this exact same performance in my previous life. Father's heart attack had been diagnosed as stress-induced palpitations after Jake's lies were exposed. Mother had used it to emotionally blackmail me into paying Jake's legal fees, draining my meagre savings and forcing me into debt that had taken years to escape. "I'm sure," I said, deleting the message. "Tonight is about celebrating the future, not enabling the past." As if summoned by my words, Sarah Kim appeared beside us with Victoria Chen in tow. "Elena, we've been discussing your presentation. Specifically, we'd like to propose a joint venture that could accelerate your timeline considerably." The conversation that followed reshaped my understanding of what was possible. These weren't just investors. They were empire builders, women who had carved out their own territories in a male-dominated industry. They spoke my language, understood my ambitions, and offered resources I hadn't dared to imagine. By midnight, Wang Kim Capital Management had evolved into something much larger. We weren't just managing investments anymore. We were creating a financial ecosystem that could challenge the established order. The paperwork would take weeks, but the handshake agreements made that night were worth more than any contract. As Alexander's driver navigated the winding roads back to the city, I reflected on the day's transformation. 18 hours ago, I'd been a college dropout with secret assets. Now I was the co-founder of what would become one of the region's most influential financial firms. My phone showed 17 new voicemails from blocked numbers. My family's increasingly desperate attempts to reach me. I deleted them all without listening. Whatever crisis they were manufacturing to reclaim control over my life, it belonged to a version of Elena who no longer existed. The city lights grew brighter as we descended from the hills, and I smiled at the metaphor. I was ascending while they fell, rising while they scrambled, building while they begged. The natural order of things finally corrected. Monday would bring lawyers, accountants, and the tedious but necessary work of transforming handshake agreements into legal reality. But tonight, I would sleep in my penthouse apartment, surrounded by the silence of complete independence, dreaming of the empire that was already beginning to take shape. My family had wanted to abandon me, believing I had nothing to offer and nowhere to turn. Tomorrow, they would wake up to discover that their discarded daughter was now one of the most powerful women in the city's financial district. The irony was delicious, but the revenge would be even sweeter. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Meridian Tower, watching elevator numbers climb toward the 42nd floor, where Wang Kim Capital Management now occupied an entire floor of premium office space. The morning financial news played on screens throughout the lobby, and my face appeared briefly during a segment about emerging market disruptors. Elena Wang, co-founder of Wang Kim Capital, has generated returns of 340% for her clients in just 90 days. My reflection in the polished marble floors showed a woman transformed. The designer suit I wore cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage, but it was the confidence in my posture that marked the real change. I was no longer the daughter begging for scraps of approval. I was the predator who'd learned to hunt. The elevator doors opened to reveal my assistant Janet looking frazzled. "Miss Wang, I've been trying to reach you. There's a situation developing downstairs. Building security called, let me guess, my family? They're in the plaza outside with what appears to be a local news crew. Your mother is giving interviews claiming you've abandoned your dying father and stolen money from your brother's medical fund." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, I could see the small crowd gathered around the building's entrance. Mother stood at the centre, gesticulating dramatically for the cameras, while father sat slumped in a wheelchair, a theatrical prop that would have been more convincing if I hadn't seen him walking normally just yesterday when private investigators photographed him at the golf course. "Shall I call security to have them removed?" Janet asked. "No." I settled into my leather chair and activated the wall-mounted screens, showing real-time market data. Let them perform. It's time they learned what real consequences look like. My phone rang, Alexander's direct line. "Elena, are you seeing the news coverage?" Channel 7 is running a story about a family dispute involving stolen inheritance money. They're using your corporate headshot alongside footage of your mother crying. "I'm watching. How are our clients responding?" "That's what I'm calling about. Victoria Chen just phoned. Apparently, 3 of her board members saw the coverage and want assurance that you're not actually embezzling family funds." I pulled up my tablet and began typing. "Send this statement to all major news outlets immediately. Elena Wang categorically denies all allegations of financial impropriety. Miss Wang built her investment portfolio through legitimate trading activities, all of which are fully documented and auditable. Any suggestions otherwise are defamatory and will be addressed through legal channels." Already drafted and ready to send. But, Elena, there's something else. My investigators finished their research into your brother's activities. The results are interesting. 20 minutes later, Alexander sat across from my desk with a thick file folder. "Jake Wang has quite the criminal history your parents conveniently forgot to mention. 3 arrests for fraud in the past 2 years, all dismissed due to insufficient evidence or family intervention. The fake medical school application was apparently just his latest scheme." He opened the folder to reveal photographs, bank statements, and legal documents. "He's been running a credit card scam targeting elderly residents at assisted living facilities, small amounts from each victim but across dozens of targets. The total theft appears to be somewhere around $200,000. My blood chilled. "Are you telling me my parents knowingly covered up elder abuse? The bank records show your mother's account receiving regular deposits from Jake's various schemes. She had to have known the money wasn't legitimate." Alexander's expression was grim. "There's more. The private investigator I hired discovered your father isn't actually disabled. The wheelchair is a prop for disability insurance fraud, another scheme Jake orchestrated with your parents' participation." I stared at the evidence laid out before me. In my previous life, I'd known Jake was lazy and dishonest, but I'd never suspected the depth of his criminality. My parents hadn't just chosen him over me, they'd chosen to enable a predator who victimized vulnerable seniors. "What do you recommend we do with this information?" "That depends on how far you want to take this. We could turn everything over to the district attorney and let them handle prosecution, or..." Alexander's smile turned predatory. "We could handle this more creatively." Through my office windows, I watched Mother continue her performance for the cameras. painting herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter. She'd positioned Father's wheelchair for maximum sympathy, and Jake lurked at the edge of the frame, probably calculating how much money they could extort from the publicity. "Janet," I called to my assistant, "please ask building security to escort our visitors to conference room B. Tell them I'm prepared to discuss a settlement to resolve this family dispute privately." "Elena," Alexander warned, "are you sure you want to meet with them? They're clearly desperate and willing to lie publicly to damage your reputation." "Let them come up. It's time they learned who they're really dealing with." 30 minutes later, my family sat across from me in the conference room's intimidating atmosphere of black marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Mother clutched her purse like a weapon, while Father fidgeted nervously in his wheelchair. Jake sprawled in his chair with false confidence, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's controlled temperature. "Elena," Mother began, her voice dripping with manufactured hurt, "we need to discuss this nonsense you've been spreading about Jake's medical school situation. You've embarrassed the entire family with your lies." I opened the file Alexander had compiled and spread the contents across the conference table. Bank statements, photographs, police reports, insurance documents, an entire catalogue of their criminal activities laid out in meticulous detail. "Before we discuss my supposed lies, perhaps we should address Jake's extensive criminal history." The colour drained from Mother's face as she recognised the bank statements showing deposits from Jake's fraud schemes. Father's hands trembled as he stared at photographs of himself walking normally, taken during his supposed disability period. "Where did you get these?" Jake's voice cracked like a teenager's. "I hired professionals to investigate my family's activities. Imagine my surprise when they uncovered evidence of elder abuse, insurance fraud, and identity theft." I picked up one of the police reports. "Mrs. Margaret Collins, age 78, lost her entire savings to credit card fraud orchestrated by Jake Wang." Ring any bells? Father began to weep. Real tears this time, not the theatrical performance he'd been staging downstairs. "Elena, we can explain. Can you explain why you enabled your son to steal from vulnerable seniors? Can you explain why you've been collecting disability payments while secretly playing golf 3 times a week? Can you explain why you thought lying to the media about my character was preferable to addressing your own crimes?" Mother's facade finally cracked. "We needed the money. Do you know how expensive it is to live in this city? We did what we had to do to survive." "You did what you wanted to do because you thought you could get away with it." I stood and walked to the windows, looking down at the news crews still gathered in the plaza. Here's what's going to happen. In exactly 1 hour, I'm holding a press conference in this building's main conference room. I'll be presenting evidence of Jake's criminal activities to representatives from the District Attorney's Office, the Insurance Fraud Division, and the media. Jake lunged toward me, but Alexander's security detail stepped forward immediately. "You can't do this to us. We're family." "You ceased to be my family the moment you chose criminality over character." I returned to my seat. "However, I am prepared to offer you an alternative." The room fell silent except for Father's quiet sobbing. "Jake will confess to all charges, cooperate fully with authorities, and make complete restitution to his victims. Father will admit to the insurance fraud and repay every dollar he's collected illegally. Mother will publicly apologise for the defamatory statements she's made about me. And if we refuse?" Mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Then you face prosecution for your crimes without any intervention from me. The evidence I've compiled will be turned over to law enforcement agencies, and you'll discover exactly how the justice system treats people who prey on the elderly." I activated the conference room's intercom system. "Janet, please show Mrs. Collins and her family to the building. I believe they're eager to meet the people responsible for her financial losses." Through the conference room's glass walls, I watched 3 generations of the Collins family enter the reception area. The elderly woman leaned heavily on a walker, while her adult children flanked her with expressions of barely controlled rage. "That's her," I said quietly. "Mrs. Margaret Collins. Jake stole her late husband's pension money, the savings she was using to pay for her medication." Jake collapsed back into his chair as he saw the woman he'd victimized. Father's wheelchair began to shake as his hands trembled uncontrollably. Only Mother maintained her defiant posture, though her face had turned ashen. "You have 15 minutes to decide," I announced, standing to leave. "Choose wisely. It's the last choice you'll ever make as free people if you choose poorly." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mother, the next time you want to tell reporters about ungrateful daughters, perhaps you should consider whether your own actions merit gratitude." Outside in the hallway, Alexander waited with a satisfied expression. "Brutal, but effective. What do you think they'll choose?" "They'll confess. They're cowards, and cowards always choose the path of least resistance when cornered." I looked back through the glass at my former family huddled around the conference table. Jake will serve time regardless. The evidence against him is overwhelming. But at least this way, his victims might recover some of their losses. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "The news crews are asking when you'll make a statement about the family allegations." I typed back quickly. "Press conference at 4 p.m. Prepare the full evidence package for distribution." As I walked back toward my office, the sea spread out before me through the towering windows. I reflected on the strange circularity of justice. My parents had abandoned me, believing I had nothing to offer and nowhere to turn. Now they were the ones with nothing left, nowhere to run, and no one to save them from the consequences of their choices. The daughter they discarded as worthless had become the judge of their fate. The son they'd favoured over me was about to become a convicted felon. And the family fortune they'd thought they could control was now completely beyond their reach. In my previous life, I'd begged them for love, approval, and support. In this life, they would spend their remaining years begging me for mercy. But mercy, like family loyalty, was something that had to be earned. And they had proven themselves completely unworthy of both. At 4 p.m, I held the press conference that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Jake was arrested that evening and eventually sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. My parents confessed to insurance fraud and were sentenced to house arrest and community service. My reputation, far from being damaged by the scandal, was enhanced by my principled stance against family criminality. One Kim Capital Management went on to become one of the most successful investment firms in the country, with I eventually gracing the cover of Forbes as the youngest self-made female billionaire in finance. I never spoke to her parents again, and I never regretted it for a single moment.